got on a troop ship in New York City and sailed to France. And that was a rough trip for me because I got seasick. In fact, they, as we went up the gangplank in New York, there were Red Cross women that gave each of us a box of 24 Hershey bars. And after I put my equipment in my bunk, I went back up on the deck and was looking at the Statue of Liberty, and I ate one of those Hershey bars. And a short time later, the troop ship started to move. And as a boy, I used to get car sick very easily. And then back to the troop ship, it hadn't gone very far till that Hershey bar came up, and I had to go back to my bunk, and I didn't get out of it until about 4 days later because I was sick all the time. And one of my buddies had finished off his Hershey bars, and he came by my bunk, and I was so sick, and he said, "Bob, can I have one of your Hershey bars?" And I said, "Take them all." And eventually, a couple of days later, I did get over, I got my sea legs, and I'd have given $5 for one of those Hershey bars, but they were long gone. But in fact, one of my Army buddies was a professional boxer, and he agreed to put on an exhibition of boxing, and they got this guy who was on permanent KP, a big fella, but he had a bad attitude, and I was airman's, I guess you call it the second. I was standing there, and he said, and wait, what was his name? Anyway, he told the other guy, "Look, I don't want to hurt you, so we'll just take it easy." And the guy said, "Yes." And he said, and we started. And the first thing he tried to do was throw a sucker punch at him, and he kept doing that, just trying to hurt my friend. But our friend finally got annoyed, and he cut him to pieces, knocked him out, and they took him back down to his bunk. But when we finally got to France, we disembarked, and they gave us a few days to get our legs back together. And then they put us on a train, and we went to the front, and we had to climb up a pretty steep mountain, and we didn't have a road. We went cross country, and they estimated we'd get to the top before supper, but it was after midnight when we finally got there. Oh, that was some march up that mountain. But there were, the 100th Division had been there for quite a while and had some fierce fighting, and they dug a 3-man foxhole to look at. They told us that the Germans often came up at night and caused trouble, and but fortunately it didn't come that night. But those 100th Division men were very happy to be relieved, and we took turns, the three of us in our dugout, and I took the first 2 hours of watching, and then I woke my buddy up, and he was going to take the next 2 hours. And by that time, it was getting close to dawn, and I dropped off to sleep, and my buddy, I heard him call out, "Halt, who's there?" And he said it 3 times, and then I said, "What's wrong, Hal?" He said, "Someone's out there." And all of a sudden he shot his rifle, and right away we heard someone shout, "Oh, I'm hit!" And we knew he had hit a GI. And what those fellows we relieved was that there was a machine gun company that wasn't actually part of their division that they had mentioned to us, and we didn't know they were there. And so that's one of many mistakes you have when you're in combat. But the next morning, or an hour or so, it started to get light, and we could see their machine gun emplacements right in front of us. And I guess Hal shouldn't have shot without waiting a while, but the damage had been done. And that night, they came and told me, or that afternoon, that I was going on a search mission myself. So I said, okay, but for some reason, they changed that and they sent Hal out instead. And coming back into our lines, the same thing happened to him, that someone shot him and killed him too. I never saw Hal again. And we were pretty close friends, but that's one thing we learned quickly in combat. You find a lot of mistakes like that. But I can still remember Hal clearly. We were pretty good friends. And but then the irony of it, that next day the Germans had decided to have enough time on that mountain, so they had pulled out, and as soon as we realized that, we came back down our side of the mountain, try to catch up with them, and then we heard airplanes flying over, and they were American planes, and they caught up with the Germans retreating, and they had, at that time in the war, Germans had gas shortage, so they had horses pulling their vehicles, and the American pilots had fired at the convoy of retreating Germans, and by the time we caught up with them, there were a lot of dead soldiers and dead horses were in the process of dying, and they were making weird sounds, really. And that was a pretty sharp introduction to combat the first couple of days we've been in. But we kept moving, and we never really caught up with the Germans at full steam. But we finally made our way to the Rhine River, and the Germans were determined to give us a lot of trouble and before we got across the river. But after a few days, we dug in, and something had happened a week or so before that. They sent a soldier who was a master sergeant, and he'd been in the Pentagon in Washington. In fact, he'd married a general's daughter. He told me all this, and he was kind of a smart aleck, and he must have insulted the wrong person, and they sent him out of the Pentagon and over to us in combat. And he was not a good combat soldier. He didn't know how to handle a rifle well. And while we were on the Rhine River, we'd put a couple of dugouts. And at night, day and night, we would guard to make sure the Germans didn't come over and give us a hard time. And I was in one dugout, and the other, about 15 yards away, was another dugout. And that sergeant that they'd sent to us, he started shooting, and I could tell, even though it was dark, I could tell he was just shooting his rifle right straight up in the air. And he didn't want to be there, obviously, in that foxhole. But our sergeant crawled out, Sergeant Snyder, and asked me, "What's wrong?" And I said, "I don't know. He apparently doesn't want to be there." And so he's doing that on purpose. So Sergeant Snyder went over and got him, took him back, and the next day they sent him somewhere else. We don't know what actually happened to him, but they told us that in 2 days we were going to cross the Rhine, and we weren't happy about that because we knew the Germans would be waiting for us. But then we got word that they had gotten a pontoon bridge across the Rhine north of there. So they put us in trucks, and we traveled all that day, and we got there, and we had to dug in because there were a number of divisions that wanted to cross that pontoon bridge under fire, and we had to wait our turn. But let's see, I'm not sure we cut it off. Huh?